The smell hit him first. Not blood exactly, something sweeter and sharper, like copper dissolved in rainwater, with a faint chemical undertone that made the back of his throat itch. Marcus Hale crouched in the alley behind the freight terminal, his knees soaking through his work trousers, and looked at the woman, the thing, the person, wedged between the recycling unit and the outer wall. She was not human. He established that in the first 2 seconds, the way you establish that a shadow on the floor is a spider and not a dust clot. The skin was the color of storm clouds just before lightning, a deep silver gray with faint luminescence along the cheekbones, as if the light source lived inside her rather than above. Her ears ended in soft points. Her hair was the white of old bone, matted with blood, with whatever passed for blood in her species, which ran dark violet where it had dried on the ground and was still a brighter, wetter purple at the wound in her side. Her eyes, when they cracked open, were the color of topaz caught in sunlight amber gold, faceted in a way human eyes were not, catching and multiplying the single orange security light above the terminal door. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said something in a language that sounded like bells being played very quietly under running water, and then she said, in accented but perfectly clear standard, "Do not call anyone." Marcus looked up the alley, empty, looked back down. The wound was bad. The clothes, and he used the word loosely for the strange layered thing she wore, midnight dark with articulated panels at the shoulders and hips, were torn on her left side, the fabric pulled back to reveal a gash from her lower rib to her hip that was deep enough to see the pale layer beneath the skin. "I'm not going to call anyone," he said. It was, he would reflect later, a spectacularly stupid promise to make to a bleeding alien in an alley at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. He had made it anyway, immediately, without thinking, the same way he had once jumped into a canal to retrieve a stranger's dog. The calculus was always the same: person in distress, action available, everything else secondary. He went back inside the freight terminal. He was the night dock supervisor. He had keys to everything, and came back 3 minutes later with the first aid kit, a bottle of industrial-grade antiseptic, a clean rag from the laundry bag, and a thermal emergency blanket from the safety cabinet. He spread the blanket on the ground first and said, "Can you move? Just onto this. I need to get a look at that." She moved. Slowly, with a control that told him the effort cost her enormously and she was not going to show it, she shifted onto the blanket. The gash was worse up close. The edges were too clean to be a fall. This was a blade, or something that functioned like one. "Who did this to you?" he asked, opening the antiseptic. "This will hurt," she said, looking at the bottle. "Yes. It will also clean it." He looked up. "Who hurt you?" The topaz eyes studied him with an expression he couldn't read, not fear, not calculation exactly, something between assessment and exhaustion. "People I was trying to avoid," she said. "Fair enough." He began cleaning the wound. She made no sound. Her breathing changed, one sharp inhalation through the nose, then a controlled exhale, but she didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't make any of the sounds a person makes when something genuinely hurts. He had worked dock loading for 9 years. He had seen men cry over splinters. This woman, this person, was bleeding through something that would have put a human in a hospital, and she was watching him work with the calm attention of someone observing a mildly interesting procedure. He worked efficiently. The wound needed more than a first aid kit, and he knew it, but he did what he could: clean, press, close the edges as best he could with the butterfly closures he found at the bottom of the kit. She had stopped losing the dark violet fluid, which he hoped was a good sign and not the worst sign. "Marcus," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry." "My name, Marcus Hale, dock supervisor. This is my terminal." He sat back on his heels. "I don't know your name." A long pause, the longest she had taken before answering any question. "Velerith," she said. "You may call me Vel." "Vel," he nodded. "Do you need—" "I don't know what you need. A doctor, someone who knows your biology. No doctors. The response was instant, flat, undiscussable. Okay, he pulled the thermal blanket up around her. There's a lounge inside. No one comes in until 6 in the morning. Can you walk? She could walk. She walked the way she had moved onto the blanket with the ferocious, careful precision of someone refusing to be carried by pain, placing each step like a word chosen deliberately, but she walked. He held the door. She sat in the break room chair nearest the window, back to the wall, sight lines to both doors, and he noticed the positioning without comment. He made tea. It was what he had. It was what he did with his hands when he didn't know what else to do. He set a cup in front of her, and she looked at it with the same analytical attention she had applied to everything else. Human caffeine vehicle, she said. Earl Grey. Milk 2 sugars. It's not a medical intervention, it's just something warm. He sat across from her with his own cup. You don't have to drink it. She drank it. Not all of it, but a considered sip which she seemed to evaluate, and then another. How did you end up in that alley? He asked. Miscalculation. Something in her voice shifted, not quite rueful, but in the neighborhood. I was told this terminal district was unwatched. The information was incorrect. Unwatched by who? The topaz eyes lifted to his. She studied him for a long moment with an expression he was beginning to understand was her version of deciding how much to say. You are a freight supervisor, she said. You fix injuries you didn't cause and offer warm drinks to strangers in the dark. She paused. You are not a threat. Great, so who's watching? An organization called the Velkari Compact. She said it the way you say the name of something that has been following you for a long time. They have jurisdiction over many things, including you. They believe so. Marcus drank his tea. Outside the terminal's high windows, the night had settled into the deep quiet of the industrial district, the distant mechanical percussion of loading equipment 2 docks over, the slow strobe of a signal buoy at the port's edge. He had supervised this terminal for 9 years. He knew every sound it made, and none of those sounds were new tonight, which meant whoever had stabbed Vel was not, at this moment, in his building. You can stay until morning, he said. There's a couch in the supervisor's office. Lock on the door. Vel looked at him. You don't know anything about me. I know you're bleeding and someone put a knife in you, and you asked me not to call anyone. That's enough for tonight. Another long pause. Then she said, with a precision he would come to understand was the way she said anything that mattered, Thank you, Marcus Hale. He showed her the office. She went in. He heard the lock click. He went back to the dock and checked the overnight manifest and spent the remaining hours of his shift doing his job, which was what he had been doing when the evening began, and which seemed like the only sensible response to finding an injured alien woman behind his building. Somewhere around 2 in the morning he allowed himself to think, well, that's a thing that happened. She was gone before 6. He had not expected otherwise. He found the thermal blanket folded on the couch with a precision that felt almost formal, the teacup rinsed and set beside the sink. The first aid packaging had been gathered and deposited in the bin. The only evidence she had been there at all was a faint trace of violet on the floor where the blanket had lain, and a small object left on the supervisor's desk. He picked it up. It was roughly the shape and size of a large coin, made of something that was not quite metal and not quite stone, a warm dark material with a faint patterning on one face, like a stylized geometric mark. A sigil, he supposed, though he had no frame of reference for it. He pocketed it, because leaving it didn't seem right, and went to sign off the overnight manifest, and thought about Vel exactly as much as a sensible man thinks about an injured alien woman who vanished before dawn, which was to say, constantly, and with the quiet, persistent knowledge that something unusual had just touched the edge of his ordinary life and moved on. He went home. He slept. His comm unit woke him at noon. He didn't recognize the contact. A series of numerals in a format he'd never seen, long and in a frequency band he wasn't sure his unit was even supposed to receive. He answered it anyway. Marcus Hale, not a question. Vel's voice, but different from last night, clearer, faster, the exhaustion gone out of it. Vel, he sat up, you're all right. I am functional, yes. A pause. I need to tell you something. Okay. The mark I left on your desk, you should not carry it in your pocket. He put his hand to his jacket pocket, which was on the chair by the bed. Why? Because it will be detectable by anyone with the correct scanning equipment, and the Velkari compact has the correct scanning equipment. Another pause, shorter. I am sorry. I didn't think. And here she stopped, and the stop itself surprised him, because nothing she had said until now had suggested she was a person who ran out of words. I did not anticipate that I would want to leave you a way to contact me. It was impulsive. I should retrieve it. You can contact me through the terminal's registered COM address. That is also monitored now. They know you have it. A third pause. You should put the mark somewhere fixed, somewhere in your home, not on your person. Marcus crossed to the jacket, found the coin-shaped thing and set it on the windowsill. Done. Now tell me what's happening. She told him. It took a while. She spoke the way she moved, deliberately, each element placed with precision, and what she described was not a small story. The Velkari Compact was a governing body, of a kind. It controlled the transit and trade corridors of 7-star systems, and it had controlled them for a very long time through a combination of legal authority and the kind of force that preferred not to be called force. They were looking for her, specifically, because she had accessed records that documented, and she used the phrase quietly, without drama, the systematic diversion of humanitarian resettlement funds. 67,000 families, displaced by the Arith contraction, had been processed through compact registry and never received the colony support they were owed. The funds had moved instead into private accounts held by members of the Compact's own governing council. I have the documentation, she said. I have been moving it to systems they don't control. The person who was supposed to help me was, she stopped again, gone. I came here because this freight terminal is connected to a data relay that links to an independent network. I needed access to the relay. Marcus looked at the wall as if he could see through it to the terminal. The relay on Dock 7. Yes. You could have just asked. A very long pause. Then, yes, I'm aware of that now. He leaned against the window frame. The data, did you get it through? Partially, enough that it cannot be entirely suppressed. Not enough that the council cannot still contain it if they move quickly. She paused. They have people at the terminal now. They are almost certainly watching your residence. I don't know if they know you helped me, or if they simply saw me enter the district. What do you need? The pause this time had a different texture, the texture of someone not having expected the question. I need a way back to Dock 7 without being seen. If I can push the remaining files through the relay, the data becomes uncontainable. The council cannot prosecute what cannot be suppressed. And then 67,000 families have records that cannot be erased, and the council is exposed. A beat. And I leave. You are not involved. You are simply the dock supervisor who found an injured stranger. Marcus looked at the sigil on his windowsill. I'm already involved. You don't have to be. I have a 7-year-old nephew, he said, and then stopped because he wasn't sure why he'd said it. He started again. My sister's family was in the Arith transit system 3 years ago. She told me about the resettlement registry. She told me how long they waited, how many things they were promised. He paused. They were lucky. They had family to receive them. Not everyone does. Silence on the line. Tell me how to get you into the terminal, he said. She told him. He listened. Then he did something she had not anticipated, which was that he improved on the plan. This was, as she would think about it later, The first moment she understood that she had miscalculated the human. Not dangerously. She had not placed herself in danger by trusting him. She was satisfied on that count. But she had categorized him: freight supervisor, ordinary laborer, a decent and uncomplicated man who had provided aid from instinct. She had not anticipated that he would look at her plan and find the places where it was less efficient than it could be, calmly, the way you look at a load manifest and reroute to account for dock congestion. He knew the compact's people were watching two entrances. He knew, because he had supervised this terminal for 9 years, about a third entrance they were almost certainly not watching, a maintenance corridor that connected to Dock 7 through the old coolant infrastructure, accessible from a building 3 streets over that shared a fire wall with the terminal. He had a spare access card. He told her all of this in the tone of a man reading through a checklist, and when he was done he said, "How long do you need at the relay once you're there?" 8 minutes, she said, if the connection is stable. Connection is always stable on Dock 7. It's the best relay on the waterfront. A pause. All right. I'll meet you at the south side of the Haverson building at 11 tonight. Bring whatever device you're using. Another pause. Longer. Marcus, his name in her mouth with a weight on it. If they connect you to this. I'm a dock worker in a freight terminal and they're covering up 67,000 displaced families, he said. That's how I'm thinking about it. She was quiet for a moment. 11, she said, south side. He acknowledged to himself as he ate dinner and then prepared things methodically. Absolutely no idea what he was doing. He was not a person who did things like this. He was a person who had once gotten a commendation from the Port Authority for maintaining the best dock safety record in the district for 4 consecutive years. He kept a clean home and a well-organized work schedule, and he called his sister on Sundays. This was not his life. And yet, he found the old access card, kept in the lockbox with spare keys and emergency documents, which told him something about the way he organized his life. And he went out at 10:30 and walked to the Haverson building by the route he used when he wanted to think, which was longer and less direct than the obvious way, and he stood on the south side in the cold and the dark and waited. She appeared without preamble, the way she'd been in the alley, suddenly there, the way shapes resolve from shadow when your eyes adjust. She was dressed differently tonight, all dark, the wound on her side strapped with something he recognized as her own work, clean and tight. The topaz eyes found him immediately in the dark. She studied him for 2 full seconds. He wasn't sure what she was reading, but she was reading something. "Ready?" he said. "Yes." The maintenance corridor was cold and smelled of old lubricant and insulation, and they moved through it single file, Marcus in front because he knew the route. He heard her behind him, not her footsteps, which were nearly silent, but her breathing, controlled, and even except for a slight catch every few steps that she was clearly choosing to ignore. The wound was not healed. He did not comment on this. Dock 7 at 11:15 at night was dark except for the relay housing status lights, a row of green and amber in the far corner. Vel crossed to it without hesitation, extracted a device from her jacket, and connected it to an interface port he had seen technicians use, but had never touched himself. 8 minutes, she said quietly. I'll watch the door. He watched the door. He thought about his sister's voice on the comm 3 years ago, describing the transit center waiting room with the small children sitting on the floor because there weren't enough chairs, and the promised screens cycling through relocation support information that applied to a system that didn't work for people like them. She had made a kind of dark joke about it later. His sister had a talent for dark jokes, but he remembered how her voice had sounded before the joke, and he stood at the dock door in the dark and watched the corridor. At minute 5 he heard it, the low register sound of a scan pulse somewhere in the building. He'd heard it before. The Port Authority used them during contraband checks. He turned. They're scanning, he said quietly. Vel didn't look up. 2 minutes. The sigil on the windowsill. It's no longer transmitting. I deactivated it when I entered the corridor. Her hands were moving over the device. 90 seconds. The scan pulse sounded again, closer. Marcus looked at the relay housing at Vel at the door. If I go into the corridor and make noise at the west junction, they'll check that direction first, he said. Busted coolant fitting. It's loud. I've been meaning to report it. Marcus. 90 seconds, he said. I can keep them looking the wrong way for 90 seconds. He went into the corridor before she could answer. Found the coolant fitting he had been genuinely meaning to report for 6 weeks, took hold of the access handle, and gave it a sharp half-turn. The fitting loosed immediately. It had been half-stripped for months, and the resulting noise was exactly as loud as he remembered from the last time it had done this spontaneously. A sustained metallic screech that echoed up the corridor, with the enthusiasm of something that had wanted to do this for a long time. He heard boots, voices. He was standing at the fitting with a work lamp from his jacket pocket. He always kept one, and a look of concentrated professional displeasure when the 2 compact officers rounded the corner. They were armored in the way he associated with port security, which is to say not very, but they both carried sidearms and they were clearly not expected to be questioned. Terminal supervisor, he said, without inflection. This fitting has been on the maintenance list since March. I keep putting it in and it keeps getting pushed back. Do you know what coolant pressure does to the Dock 7 relay housing when this fails? I've got a safety incident report that's going to have both our signatures on it if this isn't. The second officer held up a scanner. Marcus let them scan him. He stood steady and kept the look of a man who had been interrupted from legitimate maintenance work and was choosing to be professionally aggrieved about it rather than worried. The scanner produced a sound he couldn't interpret. The first officer looked at his colleague. The second officer looked at Marcus. What are you doing here at this hour? Fitting's been making this noise since 9. I logged it. He had, in fact, logged it at 9:07 because he had been at the terminal since 8 and the fitting had started again, and it was the kind of thing he logged. The log existed. He counted on people who asked what you were doing at this hour not being the kind of people who then went and checked. He was right. They moved on. He listened to their footsteps, counted to 20, and went back to Dock 7. Vel was standing at the relay housing, the device in her hand, watching the door. She had not left when she could have. She had waited. Done, he asked. Done, she said, 3 minutes ago. A pause. I heard what you told them. True story. Fitting's been broken for months. The topaz eyes studied him again. That assessment that was sharper and longer and more deliberate than any look he had experienced from a human being, as if she was not simply seeing him but cataloging something. He waited it out. We should leave, he said. They left. Outside in the alley that ran behind the terminal, a different alley from the first, but it felt like a rhyme. She stopped walking and turned to face him. It went through, she said, all of it. 7 independent networks, 11 journalist contacts, 3 external advocacy coalitions. The Compact Council cannot suppress it now. It will be public within 48 hours. He breathed out, good. The families. She said it like it was a weight she was putting down. The 67,000, they will have documentation now. Claims can be opened. It is not repair. What was done to them cannot be undone, but it can be, she stopped. Accounted for, addressed. It is something. It's a lot, he said. She looked at him for a long moment in the dark. The faint luminescence of her cheekbones caught the orange glow of the security light, the same light, or one just like it, that had lit her face when he'd found her. She looked less like a wound and more like a person. I did not tell you the full situation, she said. I noticed. I am not simply an investigator who accessed records. He waited. My full name, she said, is Velareth Ansathara Vel Ambreth. She said it in the same quiet voice she used for everything, but there was something different in how she held herself while she said it, not pride exactly, more like a person stating a fact they have learned to carry carefully. I am the seat inheritor of the Empress succession, what humans might call an Empress in waiting, the second throne of the Velkari system. He looked at her. The Compact Council, she continued, is composed of appointees whose authority derives from the Empress succession, which means their corruption is, in law, my responsibility, and their exposure is also my authority. The golden eyes were steady. I have been conducting this investigation for 14 months. Without my court's knowledge, without my advisors, because the people closest to me were also the people I could not trust, and I needed to know the size of what I was dealing with before I moved. And now you know. And now I know, and now the galaxy knows. A pause. The compact will collapse. There will be proceedings. The council will be prosecuted. The succession will have to be rebuilt. She looked down briefly at the clean, dark fabric over the wound in her side. I have a great deal of work ahead of me. He thought about that. He thought about a 14-month investigation conducted alone, with the wrong people on every side, moving evidence through backwater freight terminals in the middle of the night and getting stabbed for it. You could have gone through official channels, he said, with your position. Official channels are the council, she said. The succession authority passes through them. If I had moved officially, the documentation would have been classified and I would have been, she paused, chose a word, managed. So you did it like this. So I did it like this. Something crossed her face that he thought might have been the first version of Rye he'd seen on her. I am told I was reckless. By who? Myself mostly. She looked up. What you did tonight with the fitting. I've been meaning to report that for months. Marcus. Vel. The wry thing on her face deepened. He watched it happen, the contained person who had been managing everything with that fierce, careful precision, letting something slightly warmer through. It changed her face, not dramatically, but enough. He could see why someone would go to some effort to trust her. You did not have to do any of this, she said. No, he agreed, but I did so. So, she said. What happens now for you? I return. There will be hearings. There will be an enormous amount of very serious conversation about what the succession is and what it owes and what is required of it going forward. She paused. It is necessary. It is going to be unpleasant. You'll be all right. She tilted her head. That is a strange thing to say. You don't know that. I know you got stabbed and then figured out a way to push 7 networks worth of evidence through a backwater freight terminal relay in 8 minutes, he said. I'm not that worried about you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the Empress succession there is a word Velthara. It has no good translation in standard. It describes a person who is not kin, not ally in the political sense. Someone who acted for you when they didn't have to, when there was nothing to gain. A pause. The word carries obligations on both sides. You don't owe me anything. That is not, she stopped, started again. That is not how Velthara works. It is not debt. It is something closer to a relationship that was not expected and cannot be undone. He looked at her in the orange light of the security lamp. This wounded Empress who had folded his thermal blanket with formal precision and drunk his Earl Grey, and told him exactly what she needed in an accent that sounded like music played in a different key than anything he'd heard. He thought about the sigil on his windowsill. He thought about his sister on the comm on Sundays. All right, he said. All right, she said. She left. He watched her go. She did not dissolve into shadow the way he might have expected. She simply walked, that same deliberate, careful precision, until the distance and the dark took her. He stood in the alley for another minute after she was gone, and then he went back inside, filed the maintenance report on the coolant fitting with a timestamp and a photograph as evidence, and finished his shift. 43 hours later, the data broke. He was at home when it happened, Not that he watched it break in real time, but he saw the news cycle turn the way news cycles turn when something large and already moving reaches a tipping point, story after story cascading into the feed with the momentum of water finding a crack. Compact Council, 72 billion credits, 67,000 registered families, Empress succession, internal investigation. He saw his freight terminal mentioned twice in coverage, each time as simply the name of the district, unnamed. He saw a photograph of the data relay on Dock 7, taken by someone from outside the building, with a caption about independent networks and rerouted documentation. He drank his tea and read for a while, and then called his sister on a Thursday instead of a Sunday. "Did you see the news?" she asked before he could say anything. "Yeah," he said. "Those families." She was quiet for a second. "Those people in the waiting room, Marcus. Someone went after that." "Someone went after that," he agreed. He didn't tell her any of it. He thought about Velthara, a relationship that was not expected and cannot be undone, and thought that some things were simply yours to carry. Not secrets exactly. More like furniture in a room. You knew it was there, and sometimes you moved around it, and it was part of the shape of the space. 3 days after the story broke, a package arrived at the terminal. Not at his home, at the terminal's administrative address, which was unusual enough that the receiving clerk flagged it for him. It was small and precisely wrapped, his name on the outside in a script that was not standard characters, but that he somehow read clearly enough to recognize as his name. Inside was a second sigil identical in shape to the one on his windowsill, but made of something different, a warm amber gold material that caught the light as if it was in the habit of doing so. There was no note. There was a small card, and on the card in standard 3 words, "For the windowsill." He put it next to the first one. She came back 8 months later. He was on the dock at 7 in the morning when the notification came through. His comm unit, the same format of those long-numbered contact codes he'd learned to recognize. He answered it at Dock 7, standing next to the relay housing with a cargo manifest in his other hand. "Vel," he said. "Marcus," a pause. "I am in the city. If you are," another pause which he was beginning to understand meant she was choosing words with more care than usual. "If you have time." "I have the morning." She met him at a place he liked, a small cafe 3 blocks from the terminal, the kind that had been there for 40 years and knew what it was. He got there first and ordered 2 teas without thinking about it, and then wondered briefly if she drank tea in circumstances other than emergency, and then she walked in and he stopped wondering. She looked different, less like a wound and more like a person, which was the thought he'd had that night in the alley, but now it was more complete. She was dressed differently and held herself differently, not the precise management of pain, but something that was simply presence. Ease, maybe. A person who had been carrying something at full weight for a long time, and had recently been able to put some of it down. She sat across from him, looked at the tea. "Earl Grey," she said. "Habit." She picked it up, took a considered sip, evaluated it. "Still adequate," she said. He felt something loosen in him that he hadn't realized was tight. "How are the hearings?" "Exhausting." She set down the cup. "Necessary, slow in the way that all correct things are slow." A pause. 3 members of the council have been remanded to independent tribunal. The documentation is being used in 14 separate proceedings. The resettlement registry has been reopened. And the families. Some of them slowly. More than would have been possible before. The topaz eyes rested on him with a steadiness he had come to think of as simply the way she looked at things she took seriously. It is not finished. It is not close to finished, but it is in motion, in the right direction. That's something. Yes, she was quiet for a moment, then, I wanted to tell you something. Okay. I have been trying, she said carefully, to understand what happened, in the alley, in the terminal. I have had a great deal of time to think about it, and I have consulted people I trust, and I have read documentation and reviewed my own memory extensively. She paused. I am still not entirely clear on why you did it. Because you needed help, he said. Many people need help. You were right there. She looked at him. You say that as though it explains everything. Doesn't it? You apparently, she said, with the contained version of rye he was getting better at reading. Then the rye shifted into something else quieter, more considered. In the Velkari courts, when we discuss human space, there is a word we use. It is somewhat unkind. It suggests a young species, reactive, territorial, emotional in ways we consider unformed. She paused. I understood before intellectually that this characterization was incomplete. I did not understand how incomplete. We're reactive, though, he said, and territorial, extremely emotional. Yes. You are also, she stopped, and for the first time he saw her searching for a word in a language she spoke fluently, because the concept didn't travel well. Irreducibly present, she said finally, to the person in front of you. I have been in many courts and many negotiations, and I have met very few beings of any species who are capable of simply being where they are, with the person who is there without the weight of everything else. She looked at her tea. You cleaned a wound and made tea and asked for nothing. You did not know who I was. It would not, I don't think it would have changed what you did. No, he agreed. Velthara, she said quietly. Velthara, he repeated. Badly, probably, wrong vowels, wrong weight on the syllables, but she didn't correct him. Just watched him try the word with an expression he thought might be what Vel looked like when she was moved, and was being precise about not showing it. They sat with that for a while. Outside, the city went about its business. A supply drone buzzed past the window. 2 dockhands from the waterfront went by in high-visibility vests, arguing about something. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The sigil, the first one. You said it was impulsive, leaving it. Yes. You're not someone who does things impulsively. No, the pause, rarely. So why did you? She considered this for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then I wanted there to be a way back, she said, to whatever this was. She looked at him. I wasn't sure what that meant, I'm still not entirely, but I wanted the option, the thread. He thought about the 2 sigils on his windowsill, amber and dark stone, catching the morning light from different angles. The thread's still there, he said. Something in her face changed. Not dramatically, Vel didn't do anything dramatically, he was learning. It was the specific quality of the stillness, the particular way she held the teacup, the fraction of softness around her eyes that was different from the baseline. He was learning to read it. He thought he was going to keep learning for a long time, and that this was all right with both of them. Good, she said. He drank his tea. She drank hers. The morning light came through the cafe window at a low autumn angle and turned everything in the room the color of old gold. Her hair, the amber sigil he wasn't wearing but thought about, the curve of the teacup, the 2 people sitting across a table that had been in this room for 40 years, in a city that didn't quite know what it had hosted 3 months ago, in a galaxy that was changing slowly in the right direction. The succession hearings, he said eventually, how long do they run? Another 8 months at minimum, she paused. I am required to return by the end of the week. But you're here for a few days. Yes, a pause, I thought, the careful word-choosing pause again. I thought I would like to see the dock, the relay. Where it happened. I can take you, I'm on tonight. I know, she said, I checked your schedule. He looked at her. The contained rye was all the way out now, open and deliberate and just barely smiling, and it turned her face into something that belonged to a person who had spent 14 months alone doing the right thing and was allowing herself, carefully, the beginning of something else. You checked my schedule, he said. I am the seat inheritor of the Empress succession, she said. I have access to a great many public records. The dock schedule is public record. Everything matters if you're paying attention, she said. He thought about what she had said. In the alley on the night everything changed. A relationship that was not expected and cannot be undone. He picked up his tea. Tonight then, he said. Tonight, she agreed. The city moved around them. The relay on Dock 7 would still be there when the shift started, exactly where it had always been, doing what it was built to do, passing information through, connecting the isolated to the whole, making the invisible visible. Not heroic exactly, just quietly essential. Some things Marcus thought were like that. He went home that night thinking about the word Velthara, the way you think about a piece of music you heard once and couldn't quite let go of. His apartment was small and organized in the way of someone who lived alone and had made a sort of peace with it. Not austere exactly, but functional, the furniture placed to allow for movement rather than for show. He had books along one wall, mostly navigation and logistics, with a few things his sister had pressed on him over the years. He had a photograph of his nephew on the shelf by the kitchen, the boy mid-leap in some park somewhere, all knees and fearlessness. He had the two sigils on the windowsill, where the evening light came in at an angle and turned the amber one into something that glowed. He stood looking at them for a while before he changed and ate dinner. He thought about what she had said, that the Velkhari courts had a word for humanity that was somewhat unkind. He was not insulted by this particularly. It seemed honest, and honesty was a thing he could respect even when it wasn't flattering. He thought about the word she had used instead, irreducibly present. He didn't know if that was a compliment in her culture or simply an observation, and he suspected the distinction might not be one she would easily make, because Vel seemed to be a person for whom observations and values were closely linked. She saw clearly. What she saw, she cared about. He thought about 14 months alone, carrying something that size. He had assumed, finding her in the alley, that she was a fugitive of some ordinary kind, an activist, maybe, or a traitor who had run into the wrong people. He had not imagined an Empress-in-waiting conducting a 14-month solo investigation into the governing council of her own succession authority. He had not imagined that the freight terminal's Dock 7 relay was going to be the linchpin of a case that would affect 67,000 families and precipitate the collapse of a governance structure. He supposed that most large things began with someone making a decision in a small space, an alley, a break room, a maintenance corridor with a broken coolant fitting. He went to bed and slept well, which surprised him slightly, and woke up to a morning that felt not different exactly, but loaded with the particular quality of a morning after something important has happened quietly, when you understand that the landscape has shifted, but it hasn't announced itself yet. His shift the next 2 nights were ordinary, which was the thing about ordinary work. It didn't stop being ordinary just because something extraordinary had happened in the middle of it. The dock manifests were what they were. The coolant fitting had been properly repaired by maintenance, and he had signed off the work order with something almost like affection. The relay on Dock 7 blinked its amber and green, cycling through its handshakes with distant systems, doing what it did. On the second day, one of his crew, a woman named Petra who had worked the dock for 5 years and noticed things, said to him at shift change, without preamble, "Something happened here a few weeks ago." He signed the handover manifest, fitting blue on the coolant line. "Finally got it fixed." "No," she said, "not that." She looked at him. "I saw the news about the compact thing." "Yeah. Someone pushed a lot of data through a relay like this one." She looked at Dock 7. "Not necessarily this one." "Data moves through relays," he said. She said, and went to get her coat, and that was the end of it. He trusted Petra's discretion the way he trusted her work, which was completely. He was thinking about this, about the way trust accumulated quietly in small interactions over years, when his comm buzzed and it was his sister. You called on Thursday, she said without hello. I know. You never call on Thursday. Felt like calling on Thursday. Marcus. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was deciding whether to press. Are you all right? I'm fine. You sound different. He looked at the relay on Dock 7. Something happened. It's fine. I'm fine. Something happened like fine, fine, or something happened like I helped someone who needed help, he said. That's all. A pause. Okay, she said, in the way that meant she was filling in the blanks herself and had drawn more accurate conclusions than he would have liked. His sister had always been fast. Do you need to talk about it? Not really. Okay, a shorter pause. Are you coming to visit soon? Nico keeps asking about you. I'll come next month. Tell him I'll bring the navigation game he wanted. He'll be impossible until you get here. Good character building, he said. She laughed, and the laugh was the same as it had been when they were children. The same laugh she'd had in the transit waiting room when she'd made the dark joke to cover how tired she was. And he felt something in his chest the way you feel something you can't name, that is simply the fact of love and the knowledge of time. Next month, he said, promise. Vel came back to the terminal on his Thursday night shift, as agreed. He met her at the gate at 7:15 and walked her through. She had a visitor transit pass now, legitimate, the kind that required credentials and got scanned. He watched the scanner clear her and thought about the night she had slipped through a maintenance corridor, and he had stood at a coolant fitting with a work lamp, and felt the distance between then and now as a specific and meaningful distance. She walked the dock the way she had moved through everything, deliberately, taking it in. She looked at the relay housing on Dock 7 for a long time. 8 minutes, she said. 11 minutes with the coolant fitting interruption built in, he said. Something moved across her face. Not quite the wry, something closer to its source. You know, she said, in court strategy, there is a concept, the moment of maximum leverage. The one point at which a decision multiplies into consequence. I have been thinking about this case for 14 months in those terms, identifying the leverage point. She paused. This dock, this relay, 12 minutes of connection time in a freight terminal. She looked at him. And you at the fitting. The fitting was going to blow anyway, he said. That is somehow the part that undoes me, she said quietly. He didn't have an answer for that. He thought maybe it didn't need one. They walked the dock together. He showed her the ordinary things because she asked. The manifest system, the load rotation, the way the overnight crew handled the cargo that arrived without documentation, carefully, with escalation protocols. She asked about the relay's connection architecture, which he could explain only broadly, and she listened to the broad explanation with the same quality of attention she gave everything, which was total. You are good at this work, she said. It's just dock management. You say that in the same tone you say, I helped someone who needed help, and I just talked to a compact officer about a coolant fitting, she said, as though the competence is incidental. She looked at him. It is not incidental. He thought about what it meant to be seen that clearly by someone who was in the business of seeing clearly. It was uncomfortable in the way of a thing that was also, underneath the discomfort, deeply welcome. You're good at reading people, he said. I should be, she said. It is most of my work. A pause. I am not always good at it. I was not good at it for a long time with the council. I trusted people I should have seen more carefully. She said it without drama, as a fact that had cost her something and had been incorporated. 14 months of being wrong about who could be trusted will change how you look at people. And yet you left the sigil. And yet I left the sigil, she agreed. So you trusted me. I trusted that you were who you appeared to be. She paused, which is not the same as trust, usually. Most people who appear to be uncomplicated and decent are slightly more complicated and less decent on examination. Another pause. You were not. He stood at the relay housing on Dock 7, the amber and green lights cycling through their patient handshake routine, and felt the particular quality of the night, cold and clear and full of the sounds of a working port, which were the sounds of his life, and also full of something new that did not require him to stop being himself to contain it. I keep thinking, he said, about what you said, about Velthara, about the relationship not being undone. Yes. I want to understand it better, the obligation part. She considered this. The obligation is not transactional, it is not. You acted for me, so I owe you. It is more, she paused, the careful pause. When a person acts for you without reason, they become connected to the shape of what happens next. To your story, that is the relationship. The obligation is simply to acknowledge that, to keep the thread, not to let the connection go unrecognized. So the second sigil, he said. So the second sigil, she agreed. And coming here. And coming here. A pause, and this one had a different texture, something that was not quite vulnerability but was in the adjacent territory. And whatever comes after this, if there is an after. She looked at the relay. I have spent 14 months knowing exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. This is the first thing I have done in a long time that I am doing without fully knowing why. He thought about the first night, crouching in the alley, the smell of copper in rainwater. The decision he had made in 2 seconds without thinking, the same arithmetic he always did. Person in distress, action available, everything else secondary. He had not known then that it would become this. He did not think it had begun as this. It had begun as someone needing help and him being the person who was there, and then it had become, in stages, something more complicated and more specific and more present. I don't think there's such a thing as a fully clean reason for anything that matters, he said. You do the thing because you do it, and then you figure out what it was while you're already doing it. She looked at him. The topaz eyes in the relay light had that quality they'd had in the alley, catching and multiplying, as if the light source lived inside her. That, she said slowly, is possibly the most human thing you have said to me. Possibly. I find, she said, with the care she gave to important things, that I do not mind that. The port moved around them. The relay cycled through its handshakes. Somewhere out on the water, a cargo ship began its approach, the low percussion of its displacement engines carrying in the cold night air. Marcus Hale stood at Dock 7 with an Empress and thought, this is the shape of it. This is the ordinary world and the extraordinary thing in it and the narrow thread between them, and the thread is real, and it holds. Cold out here, he said. Yes. There's tea in the break room. She looked at him. The contained rye, fully present, and underneath it something that was not quite the beginning of a smile, but was the warm territory adjacent to one. Earl Grey, she said. It's what I've got. Then, she said, I suppose it will have to do. They went inside. 8 months later, when the succession hearings concluded and the new council was seated, and the 67,000 families had legal documentation and opened claims, there was a formal ceremony broadcast on 17 systems. The kind of thing empresses attended in the kind of clothing that made ordinary people feel as though the word ordinary had been specifically invented to distinguish themselves from whatever was happening on that stage. Marcus watched some of it on his comm unit during a break between manifests. He watched Vel stand in front of a hall that looked like it had been designed to make standing in front of it feel consequential, in something dark and structured that caught the ceremonial light along its edges, and speak in the language that sounded like bells under running water, and he could not follow any of it, but he recognized the way she stood, deliberate and careful and entirely present, precisely where she was, for exactly what this was. He went back to the dock, he finished the shift, he called his sister on Sunday. How's Nico? He said. Impossible, she said, but the good kind. He got into the advanced navigation track at his school. He told them it was because of you. I just brought him a game. You told him the map was the least important thing about finding where you're going, she said. He's apparently been repeating it to everyone. He laughed. Outside the terminal windows, the city was settling into its evening, the port lights coming on in sequence, the relay on Dock 7 blinking amber-green amber in its patient rhythm. Two sigils on his windowsill at home, one dark stone and one warm gold, and a thread that ran from here to somewhere very far away and held. The map is the least important thing, he said. That's very wise of you, his sister said dryly. I had some help figuring it out, he said. And that too was the whole truth, and he left it there, simple and sufficient. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be larger than it is. The next time she came, 6 weeks after the ceremony, 3 weeks after the final council appointments were sealed, she arrived without announcement, which he had come to understand was simply how Vel moved through the world when she wasn't required to move through it officially. There was no forewarning. There was a calm signal he had learned to read, and a time and an address. A restaurant 2 streets from the terminal that he had never been to, which meant she had researched it, which he filed away as information. He got there first again. He was early by habit, and she was precisely on time, which he had also come to read as information, that her precision was never lateness, but it was also never the early arrival that marked anxiety. She simply arrived when she said she would, exactly, as though time itself had agreed to cooperate. She sat across from him. No visible sign of the wound now. 8 months of whatever passed for healing in her biology had closed that chapter. She looked again, like someone who had recently put down something heavy and had not yet decided what to pick up next. The hearings are done, he said. Concluded. She looked at the menu, a human menu, local, entirely without context for her, and studied it with the analytical attention she gave to everything. What do you recommend? Depends on what you want. Something I haven't had before. He recommended the lamb, which was a choice informed by the knowledge that she had drunk tea at 11 at night in an emergency situation, and not hated it, which suggested she was not someone who approached new things with resistance. She ordered it with the careful precision she applied to everything, and listened to the server explain the preparation method with complete focus. You look at everything like that, he said, when the server had gone. Like what? Like you're deciding its exact importance. She considered this. I suppose I do. It is difficult to turn off. A pause. Does it bother you? No, it was true. He had learned in the months since the alley to find her directness restful rather than pressured, a quality of her attention that asked nothing from him except that he be clear in return, which suited him. He was not a person who enjoyed the kind of conversation that circled around what it actually meant. I find it clarifying. Clarifying, she repeated. Something in her face settled, the particular quality he associated with her receiving information that fit somewhere useful. That is a good word for what I am trying to do. What are you trying to do? She looked at him. The topaz eyes in the restaurant's warm evening light were less like gold and more like the specific amber of the sigil on his windowsill. The warm one, the second one, the one she had sent after the data broke. I am trying, she said carefully, to determine what I want from the next portion of my life. The succession settled. The formal succession, yes. The council, the appointments, the hearings. She paused. The question of what I am for outside of that, what I want, that is less settled. He waited. This was something else he had learned about Vel. She would arrive at what she meant, but she came at it in her own order, and interrupting the order cost more than it gained. I have spent a very long time, she said, being defined by what was required. By the investigation, and before that by the preparation for the succession, and before that by the shape of a life that was decided for me before I could decide it. She looked at the table, briefly, and then back at him. I have not had much practice at wanting things that were not also simply the right thing to want. He thought about the sigil. The impulsive decision she had made in the middle of the night in a freight terminal break room when she was wounded and exhausted and should have been thinking about nothing except the next step of the investigation. "What do you want?" he said. She was quiet for long enough that the server came back with the lamb and water and a bread basket. He watched her look at the bread with the same analytical attention she gave the menu. "I want," she said when the server had gone again, "to spend more time here." She paused. "Here specifically, this city, this terminal." She looked at him. "The question of whether that want makes sense is what I have been working on." He thought about the thread she had described, Velthara, the relationship that was not expected and cannot be undone. He thought about what she had said at Dock 7. "The first thing I have done in a long time that I am doing without fully knowing why." "Does it need to make sense?" he said. "In my position, most things need to." She stopped. "No," she said, and it sounded like a revision. "Not everything needs to make sense before it can be pursued. That is a constraint I have applied to myself beyond what was actually required." A pause. "You did not think about whether it made sense in the alley." "You are bleeding." "You would have done the same thing if I had not been," she said, "and we both know that." He didn't argue with it. She ate the lamb. He watched her evaluate the first bite, the specific attention narrowing to a point, and then something in her face settled into what he now recognized as Vel finding something satisfactory, which looked from the outside like almost nothing but was distinct from her baseline when you knew what to look for. "Good?" he asked. "Better than adequate," she said. "High praise." The contained rye. He was getting to where he could predict it, which felt like a specific kind of achievement. They talked for 2 hours over dinner about things that were not the succession, and not the investigation, and not Velthara. About his nephew, about the navigation game, about the lodge system, the port used for night docking that he had been campaigning to have updated for 4 years, about the specific intellectual satisfaction of a clean manifest at shift change. She told him about a city in the Velkari home system that had been built, partially, underwater, and the way the light moved through the architecture at different hours of the day. She told him about a bird, or the local equivalent, that sang at dawn from the towers of the succession hall, that she had heard every morning of her childhood, and had not heard for 14 months, and had found, upon returning, still there. Still singing the same thing. "What does it sound like?" he asked. She thought about this. Then she said, "Like something that has no memory of winter." He thought about that for a long time on the walk home, and in the 2 days following, and at the dock, and in the morning over tea. Like something that has no memory of winter. He wrote it down on a piece of paper and stuck it to the inside of his locker at work, not because he was afraid of forgetting it, but because some things deserved a fixed location. On the 3rd day after dinner, he sent her a message through the contact format she had taught him, which was only slightly more complicated than a standard comm protocol once you understood the architecture. He said, "There's a bird by the port that sings at 4 in the morning and sounds like it has never been cold. Haven't been awake at 4 to hear it in years. Come listen with me sometime." She replied within the hour. She said, "Yes." And that, too, was the whole truth. Something small and voluntary, offered and accepted, the smallest possible gesture toward whatever this was going to be. Not a plan, not a strategy, not the 17 Systems broadcast or the Succession Hall or the formal language of Velthara spoken at full weight. Just, "Yes, come hear this bird," and the thread between them pulled gently and held. He stood at Dock 7 and let the night do what it did, which was exist, indifferent and enormous and full of its own sounds. And he was exactly where he was present and ordinary, and looking forward to 4 in the morning and a bird that sang like something that had no memory of winter and a person who had needed help in an alley and then stayed. The relay blinked. The sigils were at home on his windowsill. His shift was ending. He filed the manifest and went home, and the thread held, and the story continued, and it was enough.